Forget meal prep and batch cooking. The meals that fed Depression and post-war families weren't planned for convenience. They were engineered for survival. Sunday pot roast became Monday hash and Tuesday soup. Whole chickens fed a family of 6 across 3 full days. Baked beans appeared hot on Saturday, cold on Sunday, and thinned into soup by Monday night. Between 1930 and 1945, stretching one meal across 3 days wasn't thrift. It was routine. Some you'll recognize from Sunday dinners, others your grandparents never mentioned. And wait until number 23. The dessert grandmothers made from what should have been thrown away. Sunday pot roast. The meal that started the week and fed half of it. Every Sunday, mothers pulled a 3-pound chuck roast from the icebox, browned it in a heavy pan, and surrounded it with potatoes, carrots, and onions. Water covered everything. The pot went into the oven. 3 hours later, the roast came out, tender enough to slice with a fork. Sunday dinner meant thick slices of beef with the vegetables and pan gravy, ladled over bread. Monday, the leftover meat was chopped fine, mixed with diced potatoes and onions, and fried in lard until crisp at the edges. That was hash. Tuesday, the bones went into a pot with water, any remaining vegetables, and whatever was left in the icebox. That became soup. A 3-pound roast cost about $1.50 in 1935, roughly $32 today. That single cut fed a family of 6 across 3 full days. Pot roast disappeared when supermarkets started selling pre-cut steaks and when ovens became too small for the heavy cast-iron pots mothers used. But one other protein stretched just as far, and nothing was ever wasted: whole chicken. The bird that became 3 meals and a pot of broth. Mothers bought whole chickens for about 60 cents during the Depression. Sunday afternoon, the chicken roasted in the oven with onions and butter. Families ate the breast and thighs hot from the pan. Monday night, the picked meat, wings, back, and scraps, simmered in a cream gravy with vegetables. That was fricassee. Tuesday, the carcass boiled in water with celery and carrots. The broth became noodle soup. One chicken produced 9 meals if the family was large. The broth alone stretched across 2 more dinners when thickened with flour or rice. 60 cents then equals about $13 today. Families paid less per meal than the cost of a single can of soup. Whole chickens disappeared from everyday tables when grocery stores began selling parts separately and when time mattered more than cost. Yet one holiday cut stretched even further: baked ham, the centerpiece that never fully left the table. Families bought whole hams for special occasions: Easter, Christmas, Sunday dinners when company came. A 10-pound ham cost about $2 in 1940. Mothers scored the fat, rubbed it with brown sugar and cloves, and baked it slow. Sunday meant thick slices with sweet potatoes. Monday, diced ham went into scalloped potatoes with cream and butter. Tuesday, the bone simmered with navy beans or split peas. The bone mattered as much as the meat. Mothers saved it in the icebox, wrapped in wax paper, and used it to flavor beans, greens, or soup. $2 then, about $43 now. One ham fed 8 people across 4 days if portioned carefully. Ham disappeared from weekly tables when bone-in cuts became harder to find and when families stopped cooking meals that required all-day simmering. Did your grandmother save ham bones in the icebox for soup? Boiled dinner. The New England meal that fed families twice, sometimes 3 times. Corned beef or salt pork went into a pot with cabbage, potatoes, carrots, and turnips. Water covered everything. The pot sat on the stove for 3 hours. Sunday dinner meant the meat sliced thin with the vegetables on the side. Monday, everything left over was chopped and fried in lard. That was hash. Tuesday, what remained was mixed with leftover gravy or broth and served over bread. Corned beef cost about 40 cents per pound during the Depression. A 2-pound piece fed 6 people across 2 full days. 3, if stretched with extra potatoes. 40 cents per pound then equals roughly $9 today. Boiled dinner faded when corned beef became a delicatessen item and when fewer families kept large pots for all-day cooking. But whole cuts weren't the only way families stretched meat across 3 days. Meat loaf, the Monday sandwich that started on Sunday night. Mothers mixed 1 pound of ground beef with oatmeal, cracker crumbs, or torn bread soaked in milk. An egg held it together. Onions and a little ketchup went into the mixture. The loaf baked in a pan for an hour. Sunday supper meant hot slices with mashed potatoes and gravy. Monday, cold slices went into sandwiches with mustard. Tuesday, the crumbled remains were heated in beef gravy and served over toast or rice. 1 pound of ground beef cost 25 cents in 1935, about $5 today. That single pound, stretched with oatmeal, fed 6 people across 3 meals. Meatloaf disappeared from weekly rotations when ground beef became expensive enough that families stopped stretching it and when faster meals replaced slow-baked suppers. Yet another ground beef dish appeared almost as often. Goulash, the one-pot meal that thickened as the week went on. Ground beef browned in a pan with onions. Canned tomatoes and elbow macaroni went in next. Water covered everything, and the pot simmered until the macaroni softened. Sunday night meant thick stew served in bowls. Monday, leftovers were ladled over toast. Tuesday, more water and a cup of rice turned the remainder into a thinner stew that stretched another meal. Ground beef cost about 20 cents per pound during the Depression. A single pound, combined with 10 cents worth of macaroni and a can of tomatoes, fed a family of 6 across 3 days. 20 cents per pound then equals roughly $4.50 today. Goulash faded when boxed pasta dinners offered faster alternatives and when families stopped reheating the same pot across multiple nights. Who remembers meatloaf sandwiches on Monday after Sunday dinner? Shepherd's pie, the casserole that became hash, then soup. Ground lamb or ground beef went into a skillet with diced carrots, peas, and onions. A little flour thickened the mixture. The filling went into a baking dish, and mashed potatoes covered the top. The pie baked until the potatoes browned. Sunday supper meant scoops of hot pie straight from the dish. Monday, leftover portions were pan-fried until crisp. Tuesday, what remained was broken up, thinned with broth or milk, and served as soup over bread. Ground lamb cost less than beef during the Depression, about 18 cents per pound. A single pound made a pie large enough to feed 6 people twice, and soup once more. 18 cents per pound then, roughly $4 today. Shepherd's pie disappeared when lamb became harder to find in supermarkets and when frozen pot pies replaced homemade casseroles. But not every ground meat dish required an oven. Cabbage rolls, the stuffed meal that turned into soup by Wednesday. Ground beef mixed with cooked rice and onions. Cabbage leaves were softened in boiling water, then wrapped around spoonfuls of the filling. The rolls sat in a baking dish covered with tomato sauce. They baked for an hour. Sunday dinner meant whole rolls with the sauce. Monday, leftover rolls were chopped and added to vegetable soup. Tuesday, any remaining pieces were pan-fried with potatoes. 1 pound of ground beef and 1 head of cabbage cost about 30 cents combined in 1938. That fed a family of 6 across 2 full days. 3, if soup stretched the remainder. 30 cents combined then equals roughly $7 today. Cabbage rolls faded when fewer families kept large heads of cabbage and when the time required to stuff and roll them became impractical. Yet one more ground beef dish stretched just as far. Chili con carne, the bowl that thickened with beans by Tuesday, ground beef browned in a pot with onions and chili powder, canned tomatoes and kidney beans went in next. The pot simmered for an hour. Sunday's supper meant thick chili served in bowls with cornbread. Monday, leftovers were spooned over more cornbread or crackers. Tuesday, an extra can of beans doubled the volume, and the chili, now more beans than meat, stretched one final meal. Ground beef cost about 20 cents per pound during the war years, and a can of kidney beans cost 5 cents. A single pound of meat combined with 2 cans of beans fed 6 people across 3 days. 20 cents per pound then, about $4.50 today. Beans were 5 cents per can, roughly $1 now. Chili disappeared from weekly rotations when canned chili became cheaper than making it from scratch, and when families stopped reheating the same pot multiple nights in a row. Yet some families stretched meals for 3 days without meat at all. Baked beans, the Saturday night supper that appeared until Monday. Navy beans soaked overnight, then simmered with molasses, mustard, and a piece of salt pork. The pot baked in the oven for 6 hours. Saturday night meant hot beans with brown bread. Sunday morning, cold beans were served with toast or cornbread. Monday night, what remained was thinned with water or broth and served as bean soup. Navy beans cost about 8 cents per pound during the Depression. 1 pound, combined with 5 cents worth of molasses and a scrap of salt pork, fed a family of 6 across 3 meals. 8 cents per pound then equals roughly $1.70 today. Baked beans faded from weekly menus when canned versions became standard and when fewer families owned the heavy pots required for all-day baking. But beans appeared in other forms too, red beans and rice. The Monday tradition that started with Sunday's ham bone. Red beans soaked overnight, then simmered on Monday with the ham bone left from Sunday dinner. Onions, celery, and a bay leaf went into the pot. The beans cooked for hours until soft. Monday's supper meant beans ladled over rice. Tuesday, leftover beans were mashed, formed into cakes, and fried in lard. Wednesday, any remains were thinned with water and served as soup. Red beans cost about 6 cents per pound in 1940. Rice cost 12 cents. A single pound of beans, stretched across 3 days, fed 8 people. 6 cents per pound then, about $1.30 today. Red beans and rice disappeared from weeknight tables outside the South when fewer families kept ham bones and when the time required to soak and simmer beans became impractical. Did your family eat beans on Monday using Sunday's ham bone? Pinto bean pot, the Southwestern staple that changed texture each day. Pinto beans soaked overnight, then simmered with a piece of pork or bacon fat. The beans cooked until soft. Sunday's supper meant beans served whole with cornbread. Monday, leftover beans were mashed and pan-fried in lard. Tuesday, The mashed beans were refried again with more lard and served with tortillas or bread. Pinto beans cost about 5 cents per pound during the Depression. A single pound, cooked with a nickel's worth of pork fat, fed a family of 6 across 3 meals. 5 cents per pound then equals roughly 1.10 today. Pinto beans faded from everyday tables when canned, refried beans replaced the labor of soaking, simmering, and mashing dried beans 3 separate times. Yet one more bean appeared almost as often. Lima bean casserole, the Victory Garden surplus that stretched all week. Lima beans, fresh from the garden or dried from the pantry, simmered with the onions and canned tomatoes. The mixture went into a baking dish and cooked in the oven until thick. Sunday supper meant hot casserole with cornbread. Monday, cold bean mixture was served as a salad with vinegar. Tuesday, what remained was heated with broth and served as soup. Lima beans were free if grown in a Victory Garden. Canned tomatoes cost 10 cents. A single batch fed 6 people across 3 meals. 10 cents per can then, about $2.20 today. Lima bean casserole disappeared after the war when Victory Gardens became less common and when frozen vegetables replaced dried beans. But beans weren't the only pantry staple that appeared at every meal. We're about halfway through now, and what these meals had in common wasn't just thrift. It was routine. Potato soup, the meal that thickened into stew, then turned into cakes. Potatoes were peeled, diced, and simmered in water with onions and a little milk. The soup cooked until the potatoes broke down. Sunday supper meant thin potato soup, served with bread. Monday, leftover soup was thickened with mashed potatoes and served as stew. Tuesday, the thick mixture was formed into patties and fried in lard. Potatoes cost about 2 cents per pound during the Depression. A 5-pound sack combined with a quart of milk fed a family of 6 across 3 full days. 2 cents per pound then equals roughly 40 cents today. Potato soup faded when canned, and boxed soups became cheaper than the time required to peel, dice, and simmer 5 pounds of potatoes. Yet another potato dish appeared just as often. Colcannon, the Irish mash that became cakes by Tuesday. Potatoes were boiled and mashed with butter and milk. Cabbage, boiled separately, was chopped fine and folded into the mash. Sunday supper meant hot colcannon served with salt pork or corned beef. Monday, leftovers were formed into cakes and fried in bacon grease. Tuesday, any remaining cakes were broken up and added to vegetable soup. Potatoes and cabbage combined cost about 10 cents during the Depression. That fed 6 people across 3 meals. 10 cents combined then equals roughly $2.20 today. Colcannon disappeared when mashed potatoes became an occasional side dish rather than a main course, and when fewer families kept cabbage. Some of you will remember potato cakes fried in bacon grease every Tuesday morning, scalloped potatoes, the Sunday bake that turned into soup by Wednesday. Potatoes were peeled and sliced thin, then layered in a baking dish with butter, flour, and milk. The dish baked in the oven until the potatoes softened and the top browned. Sunday supper meant hot scalloped potatoes served with ham or sausage. Monday, leftover portions were sliced and pan-fried until crisp. Tuesday, what remained was broken up, thinned with broth or milk, and served as soup. Potatoes cost 2 cents per pound. A single batch of scalloped potatoes fed 6 people across 3 meals. 2 cents per pound then, about 40 cents today. Scalloped potatoes faded from weekly menus when boxed, Gratin mixes replaced homemade versions, and when butter became too expensive to use in large quantities. Yet, one more potato dish stretched just as far. Potato pancakes, the breakfast that became dinner by Tuesday night. Potatoes were grated by hand on a metal grater, then squeezed to remove excess water. An egg, a little flour, salt, and pepper were mixed in. Spoonfuls of the batter were dropped into a skillet of hot lard and fried until both sides turned golden. Sunday breakfast meant fresh potato pancakes served with applesauce or sour cream. Monday morning, leftover pancakes were reheated in the same skillet. Tuesday night, any pancakes that remained were cut into strips and added to beef stew or vegetable soup. Potatoes cost 2 cents per pound during the Depression. Eggs cost about 30 cents per dozen. A 5-pound sack of potatoes combined with 2 eggs made enough pancakes to feed 6 people across 3 separate meals. 2 cents per pound for potatoes then equals roughly 40 cents today. Eggs were 30 cents per dozen, about $6.50 now. Potato pancakes disappeared when frozen hash browns replaced the labor of grating potatoes by hand and when fewer families reheated leftovers multiple nights in a row. Yet one category of meals stretched even further than potatoes, and most families made them on Sunday. Tuna noodle casserole, the wartime staple that appeared until Wednesday. Egg noodles boiled until soft, then mixed with canned tuna, cream of mushroom soup, and frozen peas. The mixture went into a baking dish, topped with crushed crackers, and baked until bubbly. Sunday supper meant hot casserole straight from the oven. Monday, cold portions were served as is with bread. Tuesday, leftovers were formed into patties, dipped in flour, and fried. Canned tuna cost 15 cents during the war. Egg noodles cost 10 cents per pound. A single can of tuna, stretched with noodles and soup, fed 6 people across 3 meals. 15 cents per can, then equals roughly $3.30 today. Tuna noodle casserole faded when boxed pasta dinners became faster and when fewer families tolerated reheating the same casserole multiple nights. But another casserole appeared just as often: macaroni and cheese, the baked comfort that turned into fried squares by Tuesday. Elbow macaroni boiled until soft, then mixed with butter, milk, and grated cheese. The mixture went into a baking dish and baked until the top browned. Sunday supper meant hot macaroni and cheese served with bread. Monday, cold portions were sliced into squares and pan-fried until crisp. Tuesday, leftover pieces were broken up and stirred into tomato soup. Macaroni cost 10 cents per pound during the war. Cheese was rationed, but available in small amounts. A single batch fed 6 people across 3 meals. 10 cents per pound then equals roughly $2.20 today. Macaroni and cheese disappeared from weekly rotations when boxed versions became standard and when fewer families made large batches meant to last multiple days. Who remembers fried macaroni and cheese squares on Tuesday nights? Salmon croquettes, the Depression-era protein that stretched until Wednesday. Canned salmon was drained, mixed with mashed potatoes and egg and a little flour, then formed into patties and fried in lard. Sunday supper meant fresh croquettes served with bread and butter. Monday, cold croquettes were served as is with pickles. Tuesday, leftover croquettes were broken into pieces and stirred into fish chowder with milk and potatoes. Canned salmon cost 25 cents during the Depression. Potatoes cost 2 cents per pound. A single can, stretched with potatoes, fed 6 people across 3 meals. 25 cents per can then equals roughly $5.50 today. Salmon croquettes faded when canned salmon became expensive and when frozen fish sticks replaced homemade patties. But not every stretched meal came from the oven. Some started on the stovetop and never stopped. Appearing, tamale pie, the southwestern bake that became soup by Wednesday. Ground beef browned with onions and chili powder, then mixed with canned tomatoes and corn. The filling went into a baking dish and was topped with a thick layer of cornmeal batter. The pie baked until the crust browned. Sunday supper meant hot tamale pie served in wedges. Monday, cold slices were pan-fried until crisp. Tuesday, leftover pieces were broken up, thinned with broth, and served as soup. Ground beef cost 20 cents per pound during the war. Cornmeal cost 8 cents. A single batch fed 6 people across 3 meals. 20 cents per pound then equals roughly $4.50 today. Tamale pie disappeared when Tex-Mex restaurants popularized enchiladas and tacos, and when fewer families kept cornmeal for baking. Yet not every stretched meal came from meat or beans. Some started with what would have been thrown away: cornmeal mush. The breakfast that became 3 different meals by Tuesday. Cornmeal, stirred into boiling salted water until thick, then poured into a greased loaf pan to set overnight in the icebox. By morning, it had firmed into a solid block that could be sliced with a knife. Sunday breakfast meant the mush was scooped from the pot while still hot, served in bowls with milk and a spoonful of sugar. Some families added raisins or a drizzle of molasses. It tasted mild and grainy and filled empty stomachs before church. The texture was smooth and thick like porridge, and it stuck to the ribs on cold mornings. Monday morning, the cold loaf was sliced thin, about the thickness of bread, and fried in hot lard until both sides turned golden and crisp at the edges. The fried slices were served with eggs, bacon, or sausage if the family had it. Some families ate them with syrup or honey. The crisp edges contrasted with the soft, warm inside. Children ate them with their hands. Tuesday morning, any remaining slices were crumbled into bowls and covered with cold milk. That was breakfast. The crumbled mush softened in the milk and tasted faintly sweet if sugar was added. It was eaten quickly with a spoon before the mush turned to paste at the bottom of the bowl. Cornmeal cost 8 cents per pound during the Depression. 1 pound, cooked into mush, produced enough to feed a family of 6 across 3 separate breakfasts. Milk cost 14 cents per quart. Combined, a week's worth of breakfasts cost less than 25 cents, and that included leftovers for the next week. 8 cents per pound for cornmeal then equals roughly $1.70 today. Cornmeal mush faded when boxed cereals became standard and when fewer families tolerated the same grain appearing at 3 consecutive meals. By the 1960s, cornmeal mush had become an Appalachian novelty rather than a kitchen routine. But stale bread stretched even further, and this is number 23. Bread pudding, the dessert grandmothers made from what should have been thrown away. Stale bread, left too long on the counter or dried out in the icebox, was torn into rough pieces and placed in a mixing bowl. Milk was poured over the bread until the pieces were covered. The bread soaked for 15 minutes until soft and swollen. Beaten eggs, sugar, a handful of raisins, and a sprinkle of cinnamon were stirred into the soaked bread. Some families added a spoonful of vanilla extract if they had it. A little melted butter went in last. The mixture was poured into a buttered baking dish and baked in the oven until it set firm and the top browned and crisped at the edges. Sunday dessert meant warm bread pudding scooped onto plates and served plain or with a little cream poured over the top. It tasted of cinnamon, raisins, and custard. The texture was soft and dense, almost like cake, but heavier. The raisins were plump and sweet. What didn't get eaten was left in the dish, covered with a cloth and stored in the icebox overnight. Monday morning, cold slices of a bread pudding were cut from the dish with a knife and fried in butter until both sides turned golden brown. The fried slices were served at breakfast with a drizzle of syrup or honey. Some families ate them with a dusting of powdered sugar. The crisp crust added texture, and the inside stayed custardy and rich. Children ate them like pancakes. Tuesday, leftover pieces, fried or not, were crumbled into bowls and covered with cold milk. That was a snack or a light supper. For children who came home from school hungry, the bread pudding softened in the milk and tasted sweeter after a day in the icebox. Some families added a spoonful of sugar to the milk. Stale bread cost nothing. It would have been thrown into the slop bucket or fed to chickens. Eggs cost 30 cents per dozen during the Depression. Milk cost 14 cents per quart. Sugar cost 5 cents per pound. A single batch of bread pudding, made from half a loaf of stale bread, 2 eggs, and a pint of milk, fed 6 people across 3 meals. 30 cents per dozen for eggs then equals roughly $6.50 today. Milk was 14 cents per quart, about $3 now. Bread pudding disappeared when sliced bread went stale slower in plastic bags and when fewer families made desserts from leftovers. By the 1970s, bread pudding had become a restaurant dessert rather than a way to use up waste. Yet one pudding appeared more often than bread. And it started as yesterday's dinner. Rice pudding, the Monday dessert that stretched until Wednesday, leftover rice, cooked plain for supper the night before, was mixed with milk, beaten eggs, sugar, and a handful of raisins in a baking dish. A sprinkle of cinnamon or nutmeg went on top. Some families added a little vanilla extract or a spoonful of butter. The dish baked in the oven until the pudding set firm and the top turned golden brown at the edges. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and baked milk. Monday supper meant hot rice. Pudding served as dessert after the main meal. It was soft, sweet, and filling. The raisins were plump and the rice was tender. Each spoonful was creamy and rich. What didn't get eaten was left in the dish, covered with a cloth and stored in the icebox overnight. Tuesday, cold rice pudding was served plain, straight from the dish, as an afternoon snack or light supper. Some families ate it for breakfast with a glass of milk. The cold pudding was denser than the hot version and tasted sweeter after a day in the icebox. The texture was firmer, almost sliceable, and the flavors had melded together overnight. Wednesday, any remaining pudding was scooped into portions with a spoon, pressed flat with floured hands, and fried in butter until both sides browned and crisped. The fried cakes were served warm with a drizzle of syrup or honey. Some families dusted them with cinnamon sugar. The crisp edges contrasted with the soft custardy inside. Children ate them like cookies. Rice cost 12 cents per pound during the Depression. Eggs cost 30 cents per dozen. Milk cost 14 cents per quart. A single batch of rice pudding made from 2 cups of leftover rice, 2 eggs, and a pint of milk fed 6 people across 3 meals without wasting a single grain. 12 cents per pound for rice then equals roughly $2.60 today. Rice pudding faded when fewer families cooked large pots of rice, and when instant pudding mixes replaced baked versions. By the 1980s, rice pudding had become a diner special rather than a way to use yesterday's dinner, but one stretched meal appeared in kitchens where nothing else lasted 3 days. Noodle kugel, the Jewish casserole that appeared at every meal until it ran out. Egg noodles boiled in salted water until soft, then drained and poured into a mixing bowl while still hot. Cottage cheese, beaten eggs, sugar, melted butter, and a handful of raisins were stirred into the hot noodles. The heat from the noodles warmed the cheese and melted the butter. Some families added a sprinkle of cinnamon or a spoonful of sour cream for richness. The mixture smelled sweet and buttery. It was poured into a buttered baking dish and baked in the oven until the top set firm and turned golden brown at the edges. The corners crisped while the center stayed soft. Sunday supper meant hot kugel served as a side dish alongside brisket, chicken, or pot roast. It was soft, slightly sweet, and rich. The cottage cheese melted into the noodles and created a creamy texture. The raisins were warm and plump. Each bite was tender and comforting. What didn't get eaten was left in the dish, covered with a cloth and stored in the icebox overnight. Monday, cold kugel was sliced into squares with a knife and served plain as a snack or light meal. Some families ate it for breakfast with a glass of milk. Others ate it in the afternoon when children came home from school. The cold kugel was denser than the hot version and held together perfectly when cut. The flavors had settled overnight, and the sweetness was more pronounced. Tuesday, leftover slices were pan-fried in butter until both sides turned crisp and golden brown. The fried kugel was served warm with applesauce or sour cream on the side. Some families added a dusting of cinnamon sugar before serving. The crisp crust added texture and a slight caramelization, while the inside stayed soft and creamy. The butter added richness that made the kugel taste almost decadent. Egg noodles cost 10 cents per pound during the Depression. Cottage cheese cost about 15 cents for a small container. Eggs cost 30 cents per dozen. A single batch of kugel made with 1 pound of noodles, 1 cup of cottage cheese, and 2 eggs fed 6 people across 3 meals without wasting a single noodle. 10 cents per pound for noodles then equals roughly $2.20 today. Cottage cheese was 15 cents, about $3.30 now. Noodle kugel disappeared when fewer families kept cottage cheese in the icebox, and when the time required to bake casseroles became impractical for everyday meals. By the 1970s, kugel had become a holiday dish, served at Passover or Rosh Hashanah, rather than a weekly staple that stretched across 3 full days.